Sean Bell's following this story for us today. Sean, this isn't a new list, it's just been updated. Give us the background to what's happened.
Yeah, you say it's not new. It's a national risk register. It highlights some of the biggest risks facing our nation. It was last updated in 2020, but it was first released in 2008, so it's been around for a while. 9 categories. They include terrorist acts, cybersecurity, and, as you say, health issues. Oliver Dowden was really keen to point out that this isn't trying to be melodramatic or alarmist. It's a series of scenarios designed to inform business and government to make informed decisions. The timing of this is a bit suspicious because there's a public inquiry going on into the pandemic, and undoubtedly they'll be looking at government preparedness for that. But Oliver Dowden claims that this new list will allow the government to be ready for anything.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Essentially, the public has been presented with a list. Is there any more detail to it? Because Oliver Dowden is saying this list will make sure the country is best prepared. Where's the evidence of that?
Yeah, and that's the thing that I'm picking up, to be blunt. A list is a list, but that's easy to identify lists. The challenge is how you do develop risk mitigation strategies and how do you find the money to resource them. A good example on that list is that it identifies that a second pandemic could have really significant implications for our country, and the likelihood of that happening is up to 25%. As a result, the government has to come up with a plan and resource it to be able to do something about it. And when I was in the Ministry of Defence, you know, we were faced with a lot of risks facing our country. The challenge was, how do you work out, how do you prioritise? And you're always resource limited to come up with a plan. So a list of risks is one thing. And let's use an example. Critical national infrastructure, pipelines of energy under the ocean and data cables are one of the strategic risks. And we saw that when the Nord Stream 2, the pipeline was erupted back in September last year. We still don't know what caused that. Here's some video image from that at the time. But the fact that it just showed the vulnerability of our energy infrastructure and to undersea. Now, how would you protect our infrastructure? Actually, it's quite difficult under the ocean. So what are the other mitigations? Well, you could have some redundancy. You could have more than one of these cables. Or you could have other mitigation strategies, but all of them cost money. And that's the key here. The government have announced this risk register, which makes a few headlines, but in itself is that's the easy bit. The difficult bit is, how do you mitigate those risks? Because if you don't come up with a plan and fund it, all you're doing is identifying the risks and admiring them. Yeah,
just a big, expensive to-do list, essentially. On there is the talk about malicious drones and how they can interfere. We've talked a lot about that in recent days, haven't we? With the war in Ukraine. It's been identified as a risk to the UK. Just how credible is that risk?
It's interesting that it's just appeared as a new category on there, and part of that is because technology, we're seeing one of the nano drones here, has managed to reduce the size of these drones, increase significantly their capability, and particularly in the war in Ukraine, we've seen how deadly that these can be. Now, what's also interesting, though, is that they're not just cheap and cheerful. They're used a lot in the country already. We look at them in the entertainment industry. We had a bit of a footage from drones, that hundreds of them, many of us have seen them now, at night doing choreographed displays. Here's one over London over New Year, and you can see the crown orbiting. It looks very spectacular, but imagine if each of those drones now was carrying a little hand grenade. Each of them can be programmed to go through the window of any building. That would be absolutely alarming. And in the wrong hands, places like airports could be shut down. In the hands of terrorists, it would be awful, or criminals. And I think what's happened is they've identified this as a new risk, but the challenge is, what is the strategy you're going to do to address it? That involves money, it involves government departments and a cross-government approach. And traditionally, the government hasn't been very good at doing that. If they don't have a strategy, then it's simply a list of risks, and that's not much use to anybody.
OK, Sean, thank you. Sean Bell with the latest there.